On April 23, 1847, a 12-year-old boy was sold at a Charleston slave auction for 9 cents. The auctioneer's ledger, preserved in the South Carolina Historical Society archives, lists him as Samuel, mute, unresponsive to instruction. The price paid for broken tools or spoiled goods. 3 plantations had returned him, each citing the same complaint. The boy would not speak, would not respond, seemed to exist in a world entirely separate from those around him. He was considered worthless, defective. Yet months later, a wealthy widow would discover that Samuel wasn't mute at all. He possessed a voice so extraordinary, so trained in the techniques of Italian opera, that it would captivate Charleston's elite and ultimately lead to murder. The boy who cost 9 cents became a secret that would destroy lives, spark a scandal that threatened Charleston's social order, and end with a body beneath a magnolia tree. This is the story of what happened when a gift became a curse, and silence became the only mercy left. Before we continue with the story of what happened in that house on Trad Street, I need to ask you something. If you're listening to this tale of forgotten American history, take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. And I'm curious. Leave a comment telling me what state or city you're listening from. Are you hearing this from the South, where these events unfolded, or somewhere far removed from Charleston's cobblestone streets? Now, let's discover what really happened to the boy they called Samuel. The truth began at the waterfront auction blocks, where Charleston's gentility gave way to its brutal foundation. Charleston in 1847 was a city of contradictions. European opera could be heard in elegant theaters while, blocks away, human beings were sold like livestock. Nearly 40,000 residents, split almost evenly between enslaved and free, created constant tension beneath every social interaction. Mrs. Cordelia Ravenel belonged to Charleston's upper class, though her position had grown precarious. A widow of 43, she'd been left with a Trad Street mansion, modest income from rice investments, and a reputation built on her years as an opera singer. She had performed in Milan, Paris, and Vienna during the 1820s, her voice described in Italian newspapers as crystalline and divinely pure. Then in 1832, a throat ailment stole it all. She married Jonathan Ravenel, a rice planter 20 years her senior, who died in 1845, leaving her comfortable but not wealthy. Cordelia maintained her standing through careful management and her reputation as a patron of the arts. Her weekly salons attracted Charleston's cultural elite. She had no children, and her household consisted of an elderly cook named Betsy, a housegirl named Patience, and a part-time groundskeeper. She needed additional help, but lacked funds to purchase skilled workers who commanded prices of $800 or more. That April morning, Cordelia hadn't intended to attend the waterfront auction. Her groundskeeper had fallen ill, and pride prevented her from admitting she couldn't afford to send a proper agent. So she went herself, wearing a dark dress and heavy veil, hoping to pass unrecognized. The auction house smelled of unwashed bodies, tobacco smoke, and fear. Cordelia stood near the back, watching as laborers and craftsmen sold for prices exceeding her budget. $300 for a field hand, $500 for a carpenter, $700 for a laundress. Near the end of the morning session, the auctioneer, a thin man named Gadsden, brought out a boy who looked perhaps 12 years old, small, thin, but not starved, with watchful eyes that revealed nothing. "This here's a returned item," Gadsden announced without enthusiasm. "Name of Samuel. Come from the Middleton place, then the Pryors, then the Beauchamp. None could get work from him. Boy don't speak, don't respond. I'm starting at $5, but I'll take any reasonable offer." No one bid. The crowd had seen what they wanted. $4, $3. "For God's sake, he's young enough to train if you've got patience." Still nothing. The boy stood perfectly still, his expression neutral, his gaze fixed on the middle distance. He wore ragged, patched clothing. His bare feet were dusty from the pen. $1, Gadsden said flatly. $1 for anyone who wants to try breaking a mute Negro boy. Cordelia felt something stir in her chest. Recognition. She'd seen that same distant expression in her own mirror after her voice failed, when she'd locked herself away and existed in silence of her own choosing. 50 cents, she called out. Gadsden looked toward the back, surprised. 50 cents I have. Any advance? I'll give you 9 cents, a tobacco merchant named Calhoun said with a laugh. That's what I'd pay for a broken hoe. The crowd chuckled. Gadsden waited for Cordelia to counter, but she remained silent. 9 cents called less attention. Sold for 9 cents to Mr. Calhoun. But Calhoun waved him off. I was joking. Let the lady have him for her 50 cents if she's fool enough. Ma'am, will you take him at 9 cents? Yes, Cordelia said quietly. She paid the 9 cents, signed the bill of sale, and led Samuel from the auction house into bright April sunlight. He followed 3 paces behind, his movements quiet and economical. They walked 12 blocks to Trad Street in complete silence. At the house, she showed Samuel to the small room behind the kitchen, a narrow bed, wash basin, and wooden trunk. You'll stay here, she said, then felt foolish talking to someone who presumably couldn't understand. But Samuel nodded once and entered the room, standing by the window looking at the small garden. Cordelia spoke with Betsy. We have a new boy. His name is Samuel. He doesn't speak, maybe simple-minded. Give him simple tasks, weeding, carrying water, cleaning, see if he understands. Betsy nodded skeptically. Where'd you find him? The auction. Sold as defective. Betsy's expression suggested Cordelia had wasted money, even at 9 cents. I'll try him in the garden tomorrow. For 3 weeks, Samuel existed like a shadow. He did exactly what he was shown, pulling weeds, hauling water, sweeping, but never more and never less. He ate the meals left for him, slept in his room, and maintained absolute silence. He never smiled, never showed frustration, never reacted to anything. Betsy reported he worked steadily, but without initiative. Patience said he made her nervous. He watches everything, but his eyes are like he's seeing something else entirely. Cordelia found herself oddly fascinated. She'd purchased him on impulse, driven by that flash of recognition. Now she wasn't sure what to do with him. He wasn't valuable enough to resell, clearly not suited for skilled work. But he was quiet, unobtrusive, and something in his careful movements suggested intelligence rather than simplicity. On the evening of May 14th, a Thursday according to Cordelia's meticulously kept diary, everything changed. Cordelia was working in her study around 9 o'clock when she heard something that made her pen freeze mid-stroke. Music. A voice, male, young, singing in Italian. She thought she was imagining it, a phantom of her lost voice, but no, it was real, coming from the garden. She followed the sound through the darkened hallway, down the back stairs, outside. The night was clear, the moon 3/4 full. The garden was silver and shadow, the old magnolia spreading dark branches over the brick pathway. And there, standing beneath the tree, was Samuel. He was singing. His voice rose pure and clear into the night, the opening aria from Rossini's Barbiere di Siviglia. Not just hitting notes, but delivering them with proper phrasing, correct emotional nuance, breathing technique that took trained singers years to master. He was singing it perfectly. Cordelia stood frozen in the doorway, hand pressed against the frame. The boy sold for 9 cents as mute and useless was singing opera with a voice that would have been praised in any European house. He finished and fell silent, standing motionless, his face tilted upward as if listening to the aid. Cordelia stepped forward, her shoes scraping against brick. Samuel turned, saw her. It was silver and shadow, the old magnolia spreading dark branches over the brick, but resignation. The look of someone whose secret has been discovered. You can speak, Cordelia whispered. Samuel said nothing, but his eyes held hers steadily in the moonlight. How long have you been able to sing like that? Who taught you? For a long moment, Samuel remained silent. Then, in a voice quiet but perfectly clear, he spoke, his accent educated. This was not a field hand. Your father. Who was your father? A musician from Italy. He came to Charleston to teach wealthy families. My mother was a free seamstress who he was singing. His voice rose pure and clear into the night, the opening aria from Rossini's Barbiere di Siviglia. Not just hitting notes, but delivering them with proper phrase. But he taught me in secret. Voice, piano, music theory, Italian. He said I had a gift. Samuel's voice remained steady, factual. He died when I was 7. Yellow fever. After that, my mother couldn't. I was passed to a plantation, then another. But you remember everything? Yes, ma'am.
I remember everything. They stood in the garden, magnolia shadow falling across them both. Seeing something else, Cordelia said, barely above a whisper. Please, Samuel.
Refuse that, or they'll simply take you. Samuel nodded slowly. So I should remain silent. Yes, no, I don't know. Give me time to consider this. Can you continue as you have been? Yes, ma'am. Why did you sing tonight? You've been silent for 3 weeks. Why break it when you knew I might hear? For the first time, emotion crossed Samuel's face. Pain or longing. Because it's Thursday, ma'am. My father and I practiced every Thursday evening. I thought in a house with a garden, at night when everyone was asleep, I might sing just once without consequences. I was wrong. No, Cordelia said quickly. You weren't wrong. I'm glad I heard you. I just need to think about what this means. She left him in the garden and returned to her study. She didn't sleep that night. She sat at her desk, watching moon set and sun rise, turning possibilities in her mind. By morning, she'd made her decision, a decision that seemed generous and practical, a decision that would set in motion events she could never have anticipated. The first lesson took place 3 days later, in Cordelia's music room on the 2nd floor of the house. It was a space she had barely used since returning from Europe. A high-ceiling chamber with tall windows overlooking the garden, a pianoforte imported from London, and walls lined with her old sheet music and opera scores. Dust had gathered on the piano keys, and the room smelled of old paper and furniture polish. Samuel stood near the door, his posture careful and alert. Cordelia sat at the piano, her fingers finding the keys after years of disuse. We're going to do this properly, she said, not looking at him. If you have this gift, it should be developed, trained. I'm going to teach you everything I know about vocal technique, performance, interpretation. But there are conditions. Yes, ma'am. You will continue your regular work. Betsy and Patience must not suspect anything. These lessons will take place early in the morning before the household is fully awake, and in the evening after dinner. No one else can know. Do you understand? Yes, ma'am. And Samuel, you must promise me something. You will never use this training to try to escape or seek freedom. You belong to me, legally and completely. This is not a path to independence. It's simply development of a natural gift. Nothing more. Samuel's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes grew more distant. I understand, ma'am. Good. Cordelia played a scale, the notes slightly out of tune after years of neglect. Let's begin with breathing exercises. Show me what your father taught you. For the next 8 months, they maintained this secret routine. Every morning at 5 o'clock, before Betsy arrived to start the kitchen fires, Samuel would slip upstairs to the music room. Every evening at 8, after the household had finished dinner and the servants had retired to their quarters, he would return. Cordelia taught him everything she had learned in her years of professional training: proper breath support, vowel placement, register transitions, how to color the voice with emotion, how to interpret the composer's intentions, how to perform rather than simply sing. Samuel was a remarkable student. He absorbed instruction like parched earth absorbing rain. Skills that had taken Cordelia months to master, he grasped in weeks. His voice, already naturally beautiful, developed power and flexibility that astonished her. He could move from delicate pianissimo to full-throated fortissimo, could execute rapid coloratura passages with crystalline clarity, could sustain impossibly long phrases on a single breath. But beyond his technical abilities, Samuel possessed something Cordelia had rarely encountered even among professional singers, a deep, instinctive understanding of the emotional truth behind the music. When he sang, he didn't just reproduce notes and words. He inhabited the character, conveyed the story, made listeners feel the joy or sorrow or rage or love that the composer had intended. It was the difference between a skilled craftsman and an artist. Cordelia found herself living for these lessons. Her days, which had grown routine and somewhat empty, now had focus and purpose. She wasn't performing anymore, but she was creating a performer, shaping raw talent into something extraordinary. She told herself it was purely pedagogical interest, a teacher's natural satisfaction in a gifted student. But gradually, something more complicated began to emerge. During the day, Samuel remained the silent, obedient servant. He weeded gardens, hauled water, swept floors. Betsy and Patience treated him with the same casual disregard they showed for any household tool. But in the music room, he transformed. He had opinions about interpretation. He asked questions about composers' biographies, about the stories behind the operas, about the differences between Italian and German music, and somewhat empty, now had focus and purpose. She wasn't performing anymore, but the fundamental reality of their relationship. It was easy to do. Samuel's refined speech and educated manner made him seem less like a slave and more like a protégé. The music created a space outside normal social hierarchies, a place where only talent and artistry mattered. Then, in January of 1848, everything shifted. Cordelia's neighbor, Mrs. Eleanor Grimble, a widow with extensive rice plantation holdings and a sharp interest in Charleston society. She and Cordelia had maintained a careful friendship for years, mutual respect between two women navigating ordinary. She told herself it was purely pedagogical interest, a teacher's natural satisfaction in a gifted student. But gradually, something more complicated began to emerge. Window at the garden, where Samuel was pruning the rose bushes. "That's a new boy, isn't it?" she asked casually. "Where did you acquire him?" "The waterfront auction," Cordelia said. "Returned him as defective. Would that be the same one?" Cordelia felt her chest tighten. "Possibly. This one doesn't speak either." Eleanor sipped her tea, her eyes still on Samuel. "Strange thing that. The Beauchamp said he was intelligent enough but simply wouldn't respond to anything, like his mind was somewhere else entirely. The other swat that will be necessary. But the conversation left his abilities hidden. They might evening, after to be more caring in German music, we can't control. The funders desperately. No, with others. Carefully, Celia said. The IA. The muses, doctors, professors discovered and performing what she was proposing wasn't used. The question hung. Widow important again, relevant again, envied again. And all it would cost was a boy who had no choice but to comply. The following Thursday, February 17, 1848, 23 people gathered in Cordelia's front parlor for her regular salon. They came as they always did. The lawyers, Mr. Huger and Mr. Pringle, Professor Haskell from the college, Dr. Porcher and his wife, several wealthy widows, a few young men interested in cultural affairs, and a visiting writer from Boston named Mr. Thornton, who was researching a book about Southern society. The evening proceeded normally through dinner and the initial social hour. Around 9 o'clock, Cordelia stood by the pianoforte and cleared her throat. The room quieted. "My dear friends," she said, "this evening I have something rather unusual to share with you. Some months ago, I acquired a young servant who, I've since discovered, possesses a quite remarkable natural gift for music. With proper training, which I've been providing, he's developed into something quite extraordinary. I thought you might enjoy hearing him perform." The room buzzed with curious murmurs. Mrs. Porcher leaned forward. "A servant? Singing opera? Indeed. I believe you'll find it quite fascinating. A demonstration of how natural talent can emerge in the most unexpected circumstances." Cordelia moved to the door and opened it. "Samuel, you may enter." Samuel walked into the parlor, his eyes carefully lowered. He wore clean clothes Cordelia had provided, dark pants, a white shirt, simple but neat. He moved to the position she had instructed, beside the piano where the light from the candelabra would illuminate him properly. The room had gone very quiet. The guests stared with undisguised fascination, the way they might examine a trained dog or a mechanical curiosity. "Samuel will perform 3 pieces this evening," Cordelia announced, sitting at the piano. "The first is from Mozart's Don Giovanni." She played the opening bars, and Samuel began to sing. The effect was instantaneous. People who had been whispering fell completely silent. Mrs. Porcher's teacup froze halfway to her lips. Professor Haskell leaned forward in his chair, his expression transforming from polite interest to genuine astonishment. Samuel sang Il mio tesoro with flawless technique and genuine emotion. His voice filled the parlor, rich and pure, executing the difficult passages with apparent ease. When he finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before the room erupted into applause. "Extraordinary," Mr. Huger exclaimed. "Where did he learn such technique?" "I've been training him," Cordelia said, unable to suppress her smile. "He had some basic instruction as a child, but the refinement is recent. I've been working with him daily for 8 months. The boy's voice is remarkable," Professor Haskell said, studying Samuel with intense interest. "The tone quality, the breath control, he sings like a trained European professional. Cordelia, this is quite a discovery." Samuel stood motionless, his expression neutral, while the guests discussed him as if he weren't present. They debated the source of his talent, whether it was inherent or learned, what it suggested about the capacity of Negroes for refined culture. The conversation grew animated, with various theories proposed and contested. "Sing something else," Dr. Porcher requested. "Something Italian. I spent a season in Naples and would love to hear Rossini performed properly." Cordelia played through 2 more pieces, a Rossini aria and a selection from Handel. With each performance, the guests' enthusiasm grew. By the end of the evening, Samuel had been asked to sing 6 pieces total, far more than Cordelia had planned. The guests clustered around afterward, peppering Cordelia with questions about how she'd discovered his talent, how she was training him, whether he could read music, whether he understood the meaning of the Italian and German texts he performed. "You must bring him to my salon," Mrs. Grimble said. "My guests would be absolutely fascinated. When can you spare him for an evening?" "Oh, and to mine," Mrs. Porcher added. "The Tuesday group would adore this." Cordelia felt a rush of satisfaction. This was exactly what she'd hoped for. Recognition, admiration, a return to relevance in Charleston's cultural circles. "Perhaps in a few weeks," she said. "I want to ensure his repertoire is sufficiently polished." As the guests departed, Mr. Thornton, the visiting writer, approached Cordelia privately. "Madam, I wonder if I might interview you and the boy for my book. This is precisely the sort of unique Southern phenomenon that Northern readers find fascinating. The juxtaposition of high culture and the peculiar institution." "I'm not sure that would be appropriate," Cordelia said carefully. "It would be tastefully done, I assure you, and it would bring you considerable recognition, articles in the Northern press, perhaps even attention from musical institutions in Philadelphia or New York. You've accomplished something genuinely remarkable here." Cordelia hesitated. The prospect of wider recognition was tempting. "Let me consider it. Write to me next week, and we'll discuss the details." After the last guest had left, Cordelia found Samuel in the music room, sitting on the piano bench in the dark. "That went extremely well," she said, lighting a lamp. "You performed beautifully. I'm very proud of you." Samuel said nothing. In the lamplight, his face was unreadable. "You'll need to expand your repertoire," Cordelia continued, sitting beside him. "Mrs. Grimball wants you to perform at her salon, and I can hardly refuse. It would be rude. But this is good, Samuel. This gives your talent purpose. You're bringing beauty to people's lives. That's not nothing." "No, ma'am," Samuel said quietly. "It's not nothing." Something in his tone made Cordelia pause. "Are you upset about this evening?" "No, ma'am." "You're lying." Samuel was silent for a long moment. Then, "You asked me to perform willingly and with enthusiasm. I did that. I don't believe you asked me to feel any particular way about it." Cordelia felt a flash of irritation. "I'm giving you an opportunity that most slaves would never have. You're using your gift, developing your art, performing for educated audiences who appreciate what you do. You should be grateful." "Should I, Mum?" "Yes, because the alternative is going back to being silent and doing garden work for the rest of your life. Is that what you prefer?" "I prefer what my father gave me," Samuel said, his voice still quiet but with an edge now. "He taught me music because he loved me and wanted to share something beautiful with his son. He never made me perform for strangers who talked about me like I was an interesting object. He never used my voice to make himself important." The words struck Cordelia like a physical blow. "How dare you?" she whispered. "How dare you speak to me that way?" "You asked if I was upset. I'm answering honestly. You forget yourself. You forget what you are." "No, ma'am." Samuel stood, his movements careful and controlled. "I never forget what I am. You're the one who forgets sometimes during our lessons. You forget that I can't refuse you. You forget that every time I sing, it's because I have no choice. Tonight reminded me, very clearly, what our relationship actually is." He walked to the door, then paused. "Your guests were very impressed, Mum. I'm sure the next performance will be equally successful." He left her alone in the music room, and Cordelia sat in the lamplight, trembling with anger and something else, something that felt uncomfortably like shame. She told herself he was being ungrateful, insolent, that she should punish him for speaking to her that way. But she didn't, because underneath her anger, she knew he was right. She had forgotten during those months of lessons the fundamental inequality between them. She had let herself believe they were teacher and student, mentor and protégé, even something like friends. But they weren't. They had never been. And tonight, in front of her guests, that truth had been laid bare in a way neither of them could ignore. Over the following weeks, Samuel performed at 3 more private salons. Each time the response was the same: astonishment, delight, animated discussion about the nature of his talent. Cordelia's reputation grew. She was invited to parties she hadn't been included in for years. People sought her opinion on musical matters. The visiting writer, Mr. Thornton, wrote a glowing article for a Boston newspaper describing the remarkable Negro prodigy being trained by Charleston's Mrs. Cordelia Ravenel. But something had changed in the music room. The lessons continued, but they were different now. Samuel remained perfectly polite, perfectly obedient, but the brief connection they'd shared prompted. He had retreated back into that careful distance he'd maintained during his first weeks in the household. Cordelia told herself it didn't matter. The lessons were about developing his talent, not about maintaining some kind of friendship that could never truly exist given their positions. She told herself she should be satisfied with his progress and the recognition it brought her. Of 1848, Samuel had performed at 7 different private gatherings. The audiences grew larger, the requests more frequent. Mrs. Grimble suggested a semi-public recital at the Hibernian Hall, with proceeds 3 more private salons. Each time the response was the same: astonishment, delight, animated discussion about the nature of his talent. Cordelia's reputation grew. She was invited to parties she hadn't been included in for years. And perfectly respectable given the charitable cause. Cordelia hesitated. Private salons were one thing. Controlled environments with careful unprecedented. That word, unprecedented, echoed in Cordelia's mind for days. She had wanted recognition, but Eleanor was proposing something larger. Something that would draw attention beyond Charleston's insular social circles. She discussed it with Samuel during their evening lesson. Mrs. Grimble has proposed a charitable recital. It would be a larger audience than the salons, perhaps 60 or 70 people. I wanted your thoughts before deciding. Samuel continued his vocal exercises, running through scales with mechanical precision. My thoughts don't matter, Ma'am. You'll decide, and I'll comply. I'm asking anyway. He stopped singing and looked at her directly for the first time in weeks. Then I'll tell you the truth. Every time I perform, a piece of what my father gave me dies. He taught me to sing because music was sacred to him, something that connected us to beauty and meaning. Now it's a trick I do, so Charleston society can feel cultured while they drink their wine and discuss me like a trained bird. If you make this public, that last private piece of my father's gift will be gone completely. But as you said, my thoughts don't matter. I'll perform wherever you require." The words lodged in Cordelia's chest like a stone. She wanted to argue, to explain that she was giving his talent an audience it deserved, that hiding it away was the real waste. But she couldn't quite form the arguments convincingly, even to herself. "I'll decline the recital," she said finally. "We'll keep to the private performances." Something flickered across Samuel's face, surprise perhaps, or relief. "Thank you, ma'am." But Cordelia had made the decision too late. The following week, a brief notice appeared in the Charleston Mercury. Mrs. C. Ravenel's musical prodigy to perform at charitable recital, June 12th, Hibernian Hall. Tickets available through the Ladies' Benevolent Society. Cordelia stared at the newspaper in disbelief. She hadn't agreed to anything. She immediately sent a note to Eleanor Grimball, who arrived at Trad Street that afternoon, flushed with excitement. "Isn't it wonderful? I took the liberty of arranging everything. The hall is reserved, tickets are already selling quite well, and the society is thrilled. You'll have to prepare your boy for at least 8 pieces. People are paying 50 cents each, so they'll expect a full program." "Eleanor, I never agreed to this." "Of course you did, dear. Last week at tea we discussed it quite thoroughly. Perhaps you were distracted. No matter, it's all arranged now. You can't possibly back out without embarrassing both yourself and the society. Think of the charitable cause." Cordelia realized with cold clarity that she'd been maneuvered. Eleanor had taken advantage of her hesitation, her moment of consideration, and turned it into a commitment Cordelia couldn't escape without serious social consequences. "The recital is in 3 weeks, Eleanor continued. "That should give you adequate time to prepare. I've already had programs printed. An evening with the Charleston prodigy, a demonstration of natural talent refined by dedicated instruction. It's going to be the event of the season." After Eleanor left, Cordelia sat in her parlor, the newspaper still in her hand. She felt trapped by her own creation. She had wanted recognition, and now she had it, but in a form that had spiraled beyond her control. That evening she told Samuel about the recital. He listened without expression, then simply said, 8 pieces. I'll need the list to prepare." "I'm sorry," Cordelia said, surprising herself with the words. "I didn't agree to this. Mrs. Grimball arranged it without my final consent. Does it matter who arranged it?" "Yes, no, I don't know." Cordelia pressed her hands to her temples. "Everything has moved so quickly. I thought I was controlling this, but I'm not anymore." "Then stop it," Samuel said quietly. "Tell Mrs. Grimball you've changed your mind. Cancel the recital." "I can't. The tickets are sold. The programs are printed. If I back out now, I'll be ruined socially. People will say I'm unreliable, that I misrepresented your abilities, that I'm not serious about charitable work. So your social reputation is more important than keeping me in private parlors. That's not fair, isn't it?" Samuel stood, his movements controlled but tense. "You said you'd decline the public recital. You said you understood what it would cost me. But when your reputation is at stake, those considerations disappear. What do you want me to do?" Cordelia's voice rose, frustration breaking through. "Destroy my standing in Charleston? Become a social outcast? For what? You'll still be performing either way. At least this way, it's for charity." Samuel looked at her for a long moment, and something in his expression made Cordelia feel suddenly cold. "You're right, ma'am. I'll be performing either way. We should start preparing the program." The 3 weeks before the recital passed in tense preparation. Samuel worked through the 8 pieces with flawless technique but no enthusiasm. Cordelia felt the growing distance between them, like a physical weight. She told herself it would pass, that Samuel would eventually understand she'd had no choice, that the recital would be a success, and then things could return to normal. June 12th arrived, warm and humid. Cordelia dressed carefully, a dark blue silk gown, her mother's pearls, her hair arranged in the elegant style she'd worn during her performing days. Samuel wore the formal clothes she'd purchased for the occasion, black pants, white shirt, a simple black jacket. They arrived at Hibernian Hall an hour before the performance. The space was grander than Cordelia had anticipated. A proper theatre with rows of seats, a raised stage, gas lighting that could be adjusted for dramatic effect. 73 tickets had been sold, Eleanor informed her proudly. Standing room only. Everyone who matters in Charleston will be here. Cordelia's stomach tightened. This was so far beyond what she'd originally intended. A few performances in her music room, maybe a handful of private salons. Now Samuel would be standing on a public stage, performing for the city's elite like a curiosity in a museum. Backstage, Samuel stood by the window looking out at the street. "Are you nervous?" Cordelia asked. "No, ma'am. You should vocalize before we begin." "I've been vocalizing all afternoon. I'm prepared." The audience filed in. Cordelia recognized most of them. The city's wealthy families, prominent merchants, several professors, visiting dignitaries from Columbia and Savannah. Mr. Thornton, the Boston writer, sat in the third row with a notebook. At exactly 8 o'clock, Eleanor Grimball walked onto the stage and welcomed the audience. She spoke about the Ladies' Benevolent Society's charitable work, thanked everyone for their generous support, and then introduced Cordelia. Cordelia walked onto the stage, acutely conscious of every eye in the room. She gave a brief speech about discovering Samuel's talent, about the months of training, about the remarkable capacity for artistic development she'd witnessed. Then she gestured to the wings, and Samuel walked onto the stage. The audience stirred with interest. Samuel moved to the center of the stage, his face carefully neutral, and waited for Cordelia to sit at the piano. She played the opening bars of the first piece, Mozart's Dalla sua pace from Don Giovanni. Samuel began to sing, and the audience fell silent. He was technically perfect. Every note precisely placed, every phrase properly shaped, every breath strategically taken. But something was missing. The emotional depth, the interpretive nuance that had made his private performances so extraordinary. It was gone. He sang like a skilled musician executing a score, not like an artist interpreting a work of beauty. Cordelia felt panic rise in her chest. The audience was listening politely, but she could sense their slight disappointment. They had expected something transcendent based on the reports from the salons. This was merely very good. They moved through the program, Rossini, Handel, Schubert, Donizetti. Samuel's technique remained flawless, but the performances felt hollow. By the sixth piece, Cordelia noticed people whispering to each other, shifting in their seats. They were impressed, but not transported. During the brief intermission, Eleanor cornered Cordelia backstage. "What's wrong with him? He sounds nothing like he did at my salon." "I don't know," Cordelia said, though she suspected she knew exactly what was wrong. Samuel was giving her precisely what she'd demanded: perfect obedience, flawless execution. He was performing without his soul. The second half of the program proceeded with the same technically perfect but emotionally distant delivery. When the final piece ended, the audience applauded politely. Not the enthusiastic response Cordelia had hoped for, but not a disaster either. People came backstage afterward to congratulate her on Samuel's training, to comment on his remarkable technique, but the conversations felt dutiful rather than excited. Mr. Thornton approached as the crowd thinned. "Mrs. Ravenel, might I speak candidly?" "Of course. The boy is clearly well trained, but tonight's performance lacked the vitality I'd heard described. He seemed to be going through motions rather than truly engaging with the music. Was he perhaps unwell?" "No, I don't believe so." Well, talent can be unpredictable, particularly in the young. Perhaps the pressure of a public performance affected him." Thornton smiled sympathetically. Still, it was an interesting evening. Thank you for the opportunity to witness it. After everyone had left, Cordelia and Samuel rode home in silence. The carriage rattled over the cobblestones, gas streetlights casting moving shadows across Samuel's expressionless face. At home, Cordelia followed Samuel to the music room. "What happened tonight?" she asked bluntly. "You sang nothing like you're capable of." "I sang exactly what you taught me, ma'am. Every note correct, every technique properly applied. You know that's not what I mean. You gave them nothing of yourself. You were deliberately withholding." "Was I?" Samuel's voice remained quiet, but there was steel underneath now. "Or perhaps there's simply nothing left to give. You've taken what my father gave me and turned it into something else entirely. Tonight, standing on that stage, being stared at like an object of curiosity, that's what my voice means now. Not beauty, not connection, not love. Just proof that you can train a slave to perform tricks for Charleston society. That's not what this is." "Then what is it, Mrs. Ravenel?" For the first time, real anger broke through Samuel's careful control. "Tell me honestly what this is." Cordelia opened her mouth to respond, but no words came, because she couldn't explain it in a way that didn't confirm exactly what Samuel had said. "The recital is over," she said finally. "No more public performances. We'll go back to the private salons and only occasionally. I promise you that." Samuel laughed, a bitter sound that Cordelia had never heard from him before. "Your promises don't mean anything anymore, ma'am. Mrs. Grimball arranged tonight without your agreement. Do you think she'll stop now? Do you think any of them will? You've created something they want, and they'll find ways to have it whether you agree or not." He was right, Cordelia realized with growing dread. She had lost control of this entirely. Samuel's prediction proved accurate within a week. Despite the recital's lukewarm reception, the very fact of a Negro slave performing opera had sparked intense interest. Letters arrived daily, requesting private performances. A theater manager from Savannah wrote proposing a tour of Georgia. A wealthy planter from Columbia wanted to hire Samuel for his daughter's wedding celebration. Cordelia refused them all, but the requests kept coming. More troubling were the visitors who began appearing at her door, men interested in purchasing Samuel outright. A rice planter offered $1,200. A Charleston merchant offered $1,500. Both were staggering sums for a single slave, reflecting Samuel's perceived value as a performing curiosity. "I'm not selling him," Cordelia told each visitor firmly. But after the third offer, $2,000 from a Virginia plantation owner, she realized the situation was becoming dangerous. Samuel represented enough money to solve all her financial concerns permanently. People were beginning to question why she would refuse such offers. Mrs. Grimble raised the issue directly during a visit in late June. "Cordelia, dear, people are talking. Why won't you sell the boy? $2,000 is a fortune. You could invest it properly and live comfortably for years." "He's not for sale because I'm still training him," Cordelia said. "His development isn't complete, but surely his value will never be higher than it is now. The novelty will fade. If you're going to profit from your investment, this is the time." "I'm not looking to profit. I'm interested in his artistic development." Eleanor's expression turned skeptical. "People are starting to say odd things, Cordelia. That you've grown too attached. That there's something improper about your interest in a slave boy. I'm telling you this as a friend. Sell him now, before the gossip becomes damaging." After Eleanor left, Cordelia sat in her parlor, Eleanor's words echoing in her mind. She had never considered how her actions might appear to others. She had thought of herself as a teacher, a patron of the arts, someone developing remarkable talent. But from outside, what did it look like? A widow spending hours alone daily with a teenage slave boy, refusing lucrative offers to sell him, becoming defensive when questioned. That evening she didn't call Samuel for his lesson. Instead, she sat alone in the music room trying to untangle her own motivations. Was Eleanor right? Had she become inappropriately attached? She told herself it was purely about the music, about creating something beautiful, about having purpose again in her life. But was that the whole truth? She thought about the past months, the way she'd looked forward to the lessons, the satisfaction she'd felt in Samuel's progress, the anger she'd experienced when he'd withdrawn from her after the first salon performance. Was that the reaction of a teacher or something more complicated? Samuel knocked on the doorframe. "Mum, it's 8 o'clock. Cordelia looked up, startled. "Yes, come in." Samuel entered but remained near the door, his posture wary. "Are we continuing the lessons?" "I don't know." Cordelia's voice sounded tired even to herself. "People are talking, Samuel, about why I won't sell you, about why I spend so much time training you. The gossip is becoming complicated." "Then sell me," Samuel said simply. "Take the money. Use it to secure your position. Isn't that what you need? Is that what you want? What I want doesn't matter, remember?" But then Samuel's expression softened slightly. "For what it's worth, whoever buys me will certainly make me perform. At least with you, I had moments when it felt like music rather than just performance. But if keeping me is damaging your reputation, you should sell me. I'll survive either way." Cordelia stood abruptly and walked to the window. The garden below was dark, the magnolia tree a shadow against the night sky. She remembered standing in almost this exact spot months ago, listening to Samuel sing for the first time, feeling that mixture of wonder and possibility. "I'm not going to sell you," she said, "but things have to change. No more public performances, no more salons. We'll continue the private lessons, but only for your development, not for display. People will still talk. Let them talk." Cordelia turned to face him. "I've made mistakes, Samuel. I let this become about my own needs rather than your gift. I let other people's expectations drive decisions I should have controlled. But I'm telling you now, no more performances for others. Your voice is yours again." Samuel studied her face in the lamplight, and for the first time in weeks, some of the careful distance in his expression eased. "Do you mean that?" "Yes, I mean it." They stood there in silence for a moment, and something like the old understanding passed between them. Then Samuel said quietly, "There's something you should know, ma'am. Mr. Drayton, the Virginia plantation owner who offered $2,000, he came back yesterday while you were out. He spoke with Betsy. He said he'd pay $3,000 if she could convince you to sell me. He said wealthy men don't like being refused, and if you wouldn't sell me willingly, there were other ways to acquire property." Cordelia felt ice form in her stomach. "He threatened me?" "Not directly, but Betsy was frightened enough to mention it. She thought you should know." "Did he threaten you?" "He implied that if I were to run away, he might be in a position to purchase me from whoever caught me, and runaways always get caught eventually." Cordelia crossed the room and gripped Samuel's shoulders, the first time she'd touched him since the day she'd bought him. "You're not running away, and you're not being sold to Drayton or anyone else. I'll write to Judge Huger tomorrow. He's a friend, and he has influence. We'll make sure Drayton understands that further harassment will have legal consequences." "Why?" Samuel asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. "Why go to such trouble? $3,000 would change your life." Cordelia dropped her hands, suddenly uncertain how to answer. "Because you were right," she said finally, "about what I did to your father's gift, about what the performances became. I can't undo that, but I can stop it from getting worse. I can give you back something that resembles what he intended for you. Or you could just free me," Samuel said quietly. The words hung in the air between them. Cordelia felt her heart begin to pound. "I can't do that." "Why not?" "Because," she struggled to articulate the reasons. "Because legally it's complicated. Because you'd have no means to support yourself. Because you don't want to," Samuel interrupted gently. "Because despite everything, you want to keep me here. Keep the lessons. Keep some connection to the music you lost." Cordelia turned away, unable to meet his eyes. "That's not fair." "It's true, though, isn't it?" She didn't answer, because they both knew it was. The solution to Mr. Drayton's harassment came from an unexpected source. Judge Huger, upon hearing about the situation, suggested that Cordelia create a legal document specifying that Samuel could only be sold to her designated heir upon her death, effectively making him unsellable during her lifetime. It was an unusual arrangement, but legally sound. It will stop the harassment, Huger explained. Once word spreads that the boy cannot be purchased under any circumstances, people will stop making offers. Of course, you'll need to name an heir. Do you have family who could serve in that capacity? Cordelia hesitated. Her only living relative was a cousin in Baltimore who she hadn't seen in a decade. But she agreed to the arrangement, and the documents were drawn up and filed with the city records in early July. The strategy worked. Within 2 weeks, the purchase offers stopped. Mr. Drayton left Charleston without further contact. Cordelia's household settled into a new routine. No performances, no salons, just the private lessons twice daily. But something fundamental had shifted. Samuel had named the truth that Cordelia had been avoiding. She was keeping him not for his own good, but for hers. And once that truth was spoken, it poisoned everything else. The lessons continued through the summer, but they felt different. Samuel remained technically proficient, but the joy was gone. He learned what Cordelia taught him, practiced what she assigned, but there was no engagement, no curiosity, no partnership. They had become simply what they'd always legally been, owner and property. By September, Cordelia noticed changes in Samuel beyond just his demeanor during lessons. He had turned 15 that summer. She'd learned his birth date from the original auction papers, and was no longer the slight 12-year-old boy she'd purchased. He had grown taller, his voice had deepened and matured, gaining power and richness. He was becoming a young man. The changes unsettled her in ways she didn't want to examine. She found herself noticing things she shouldn't notice. The way he moved, the expressiveness in his eyes when he sang, the intelligence in his face. She was 44 years old, a widow, a woman of social standing. These thoughts were not just inappropriate, they were dangerous. She began shortening the lessons, 30 minutes instead of an hour, 3 times a week instead of daily. She told herself it was because Samuel had mastered all she could teach him, that continuing was unnecessary. But really, she was putting distance between them, because the alternative was acknowledging feelings she couldn't allow herself to have. Samuel noticed the change, but said nothing. He came when called, sang what was requested, and left when dismissed. The careful distance he'd maintained after the first salon had become absolute. In October, Mrs. Grimble visited with troubling news. "Cordelia, I feel I must tell you something unpleasant. There are rumors circulating about you and your slave boy. People are saying, well, they're saying that your interest in him goes beyond proper bounds. That you keep him locked in the house, that you refuse visitors, that you're engaged in something unnatural. That's absurd," Cordelia said, feeling heat rise in her face. "I barely see him anymore except for occasional lessons." "I know that. You know that. But perception matters more than truth in Charleston society. I'm telling you this because I care about your reputation. You need to be seen with the boy in public, in appropriate contexts. Have him serve at your next dinner party. Let people see him doing normal servant's work. Otherwise, the whispers will only grow worse." After Eleanor left, Cordelia sat in her parlor, feeling trapped. The gossip was forcing her to either display Samuel like the performing curiosity she'd vowed not to make him, or to isolate herself completely from society. There was no middle ground. That evening, she called Samuel to the music room. "I need you to serve at a dinner party I'm hosting Friday evening. Just regular household service, passing dishes, pouring wine. Mrs. Grimble says people need to see you doing ordinary servant's work." Samuel's expression hardened. "So I'm not to perform, but I'm to be displayed anyway, just in a different capacity." "It's not like that. It's exactly like that. You're managing how Charleston society perceives us, making sure they don't think something improper is happening. Is that so wrong? To protect both our reputations?" "I don't have a reputation to protect," Samuel said quietly. "I'm property. But you do. So yes, I'll serve at your dinner party. I'll be the perfect silent servant. I'll prove to Charleston that there's nothing unnatural about our relationship. Will that satisfy you? Samuel, is there anything else, ma'am? Cordelia wanted to say something to bridge the chasm between them, to explain that she was trying to protect them both, that the situation was impossible and she was doing her best. But looking at Samuel's closed expression, she knew nothing she said would matter. No, that's all. He left, and Cordelia remained alone in the music room. She walked to the piano and played a single note, letting it ring in the silence. Then another. Then the opening bars of the Mozart aria Samuel had sung that first night in the garden, the night when everything had still seemed possible. She played through the entire piece, her fingers finding the notes from memory, her voice silent but the melody running through her mind. When she finished, she lowered her hands to her lap and sat in the darkness, listening to the echo fade. The dinner party was scheduled for Friday, November 3rd, but on Thursday evening, everything changed. Cordelia was in her study, reviewing household accounts, when she heard raised voices from below. Betsy's voice sharp with alarm, and Samuel's responding, the first time Cordelia had heard him speak to the other servants in months. She hurried downstairs to find Betsy in the kitchen, pressed against the wall, fear stark on her face. Samuel stood near the back door, breathing hard, his shirt torn, blood on his lip. "What happened?" Cordelia demanded. "He attacked me," Betsy said, her voice shaking. "I was telling him about tomorrow's dinner party, about how he needed to wear proper clothes and mind his manners, and he turned on me, grabbed my arm and pushed me against the wall." "That's not what happened," Samuel said, his voice low and controlled despite the blood on his face. "Betsy said if I didn't want to serve at the dinner party, maybe I'd prefer being sold to Mr. Drayton. She said she knew people who could arrange it. When I tried to leave, she grabbed me. I pushed her away, that's all." Betsy's eyes widened. "That's a lie. Miss Cordelia, he's lying. You can't believe a word he says." Cordelia looked between them, her heart racing. Betsy had been with her for 15 years, loyal and reliable. But Samuel had never lied to her, not once in all the months since that first night in the garden. "Betsy," Cordelia said slowly, "did you threaten to have Samuel sold?" "I was just trying to make him see sense. He's been acting peculiar for months, Miss Cordelia, sullen and quiet and not doing his proper work. I thought a reminder of his place might help. I didn't mean nothing by it. You threatened him with being sold to a man who harassed this household. Well, he needs to understand. Get out," Cordelia said quietly. Betsy stared. "Ma'am, get out of my house. Pack your things and leave tonight. I'll send your wages to your sister's address tomorrow." "Miss Cordelia, you can't. I've been with you 15 years. You're going to dismiss me over him?" "You threatened one of my household with illegal sale. Yes, I'm dismissing you. Now leave before I have you removed by the constable." Betsy looked at Samuel with pure hatred, then at Cordelia with something closer to pity. "You're a fool, Mrs. Ravenel. Everyone in Charleston sees what you can't see yourself. This boy has bewitched you somehow, and you're going to destroy yourself for him. I hope he's worth it." She swept out of the kitchen, and they heard her heavy footsteps on the stairs, the slam of her bedroom door. Cordelia turned to Samuel. "Are you all right?" "I'm fine." He touched his split lip gingerly. "She hits harder than she looks." Despite everything, Cordelia almost smiled. Then the reality of what she'd just done hit her. She'd dismissed her cook of 15 years, her most senior servant, over a confrontation with a slave. The gossip would be catastrophic. "I'm sorry," Samuel said quietly. "I've ruined everything for you." "No." Cordelia surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. "Betsy ruined herself by making threats she had no right to make. You were defending yourself." "Mrs. Ravenel, Cordelia, you need to sell me." It was the first time he'd ever used her given name, and it sent a shock through her. Not to Drayton or anyone cruel, but to someone decent, someone far from Charleston. "Before this destroys you completely." "I can't." "Why not?" Samuel stepped closer, and Cordelia saw real anguish in his eyes. "Why won't you let me go? I'm not your son. I'm not your student anymore. I'm not anything except a burden that's destroying your life. Why won't you just let me go?" Cordelia opened her mouth to answer, to give some rational explanation about responsibility or artistic development or legal complications. But looking at Samuel's face in the lamplight, with blood still fresh on his lip and his eyes full of pain and confusion, she couldn't lie anymore. "Because I need you," she whispered. "Because when my voice died, part of me died with it. And then I heard you singing, and I felt alive again. I know it's selfish, I know it's wrong. I know I've taken something beautiful and made it into something twisted, but I can't let you go, because without you, I'm just a widow in a house full of silence, mourning something I lost 20 years ago." The admission hung in the air between them, raw and terrible. Samuel's expression shifted from anguish to something more complex, understanding perhaps, or pity, or resignation. "Then we're both trapped," he said finally. "You by what you've lost, and me by what you need. Neither of us can save the other." "I know," Cordelia said, tears now running down her face. "I know." They stood there in the kitchen, owner and slave, teacher and student, two people caught in circumstances neither could escape. And in that moment, Cordelia realized with cold certainty that this situation could only end one way, in tragedy that would consume them both. The dinner party was cancelled. Cordelia sent notes claiming sudden illness. By the next afternoon, Betsy's departure and the circumstances surrounding it had spread through Charleston like wildfire. The invitations stopped coming. By mid-November, Cordelia found herself truly isolated, just her, Patience, and Samuel in the silent house on Trad Street. The music lessons ended. There seemed no point anymore. Samuel did basic work during the day, and in the evenings, Cordelia sat alone, listening to the silence that had become her constant companion once again. On November 27th, Judge Huger's letter arrived, brief and formal, informing her he could no longer serve as her legal counsel due to unfortunate circumstances and resulting damage to reputation. That evening, Cordelia climbed to the music room and sat at the piano, staring at the keys. She had destroyed herself slowly and thoroughly, trying to make a boy purchased for 9 cents into something that would give her life meaning again. She heard footsteps, and knew without looking it was Samuel. He appeared in the doorway. "You should sell me," he said gently. "Somewhere far away. You can rebuild your life. And what happens to you? I survive. I always have." They sat together at the piano bench in the fading light. Finally, Cordelia spoke. "I'm not going to sell you. Tomorrow I'm writing to my cousin in Baltimore. She has connections to the free Negro community there. I'll send you with papers giving you permission to travel and work. It's not freedom. I can't legally free you in South Carolina without legislative approval. But it's close. You'll be far from here, with opportunities to use your gift properly." Samuel turned to her, surprised. "Why would you do that?" "Because you were right. We're both trapped. But I'm the one with the power to open the cage. Your reputation will be destroyed even more completely. I don't care anymore. I'm tired of caring what Charleston thinks. I just want to do one right thing." Samuel nodded slowly. "Will you play something? Just once more?" Cordelia's hands found the keys, a simple folk melody her mother had taught her as a child. Samuel hummed along softly, and their sounds blended together in the dimming light, creating something that felt less like performance and more like prayer. When it ended, Cordelia stood. "I'll write the letters tonight. You'll leave within the week. My cousin Margaret will help you find honest work. It won't be opera houses, but it will be your gift used freely." "Thank you," Samuel said, genuine warmth in his voice. At the doorway, Cordelia paused. That first night in the garden, that was the most beautiful thing I'd heard in 20 years. "I'm sorry I couldn't leave it at that." "I know," Samuel said quietly. "I forgive you." She left before he could see her cry. That night, she wrote 2 letters, one to Margaret explaining the situation, another granting Samuel legal permission to live and work in Baltimore. She sealed them and went to bed feeling for the first time in months that she'd made a decision she could live with. She woke to screaming. Patience's voice echoed through the house. Cordelia ran downstairs and found Patience in the kitchen doorway, trembling, pointing toward the garden. In the grey dawn light, Mrs. Eleanor Grimball lay beneath the magnolia tree, her neck bent at an impossible angle, still wearing her evening dress. One shoe was missing. Her reticule lay open, contents scattered. Cordelia knelt beside the body. There were bruises on Eleanor's throat, finger marks. Eleanor's right hand was clenched, and when Cordelia opened it, she found dark threads caught in the grip. Coarse fabric, like a work shirt. She looked around the garden with new eyes. The back gate hung open. The ground was scuffed. A torn piece of dark fabric caught on the magnolia branch. She climbed the stairs to Samuel's room and knocked. No answer. She opened the door. Empty. The bed made. The trunk open and bare. Samuel was gone. Cordelia sank onto the bed, piecing it together. Eleanor must have come last night, perhaps to confront her again or to try preventing Samuel's departure. There must have been a confrontation in the garden, a struggle. And now Eleanor was dead and Samuel had fled. But Samuel was controlled, intelligent. If Eleanor was dead, it was because he'd made a choice. But why? Why throw away the escape she'd just offered him? Unless he hadn't known about the letters. Unless he'd been planning to run that very night. Unless Eleanor had discovered him and threatened to raise the alarm. Constable Robertson arrived within the hour. He examined the body, the garden, and then Cordelia with the same suspicious attention. "Your slave boy. Where is he?" "I don't know. His room is empty." Robertson's eyes narrowed. "There's been talk about you and this boy, Mrs. Ravenel. About an unusual relationship. Now that slave has killed a prominent Charleston lady and fled. We found your letters on the desk about sending him to Baltimore. Looks like you were helping a murderer escape. That's absurd. We'll see. I'm placing you under house arrest pending investigation, and I'm putting out notices to every patrol between here and Baltimore. Your boy won't get far." For 3 days, Charleston buzzed with scandal. The newspapers ran lurid stories about the Trad Street murder. Some said Samuel had been Cordelia's lover. Others claimed voodoo rituals. Still others suggested madness. On the 4th day, Samuel was captured near the North Carolina border. A slave patrol found him in a barn, exhausted and half-starved. He hadn't resisted. They brought him back in chains. The trial was December 15th. The courtroom packed. Samuel was brought in wearing leg irons, his face hollow. When he saw Cordelia, something flickered between them. Acknowledgement. The evidence was damning. The body, the torn fabric matching Samuel's shirt, the bruises, his flight. The prosecutor built his case methodically. Samuel had been resentful, angry, planning to run. Mrs. Grimball discovered him and tried to stop him. He killed her. "He's an intelligent Negro given ideas above his station," the prosecutor concluded, taught to think himself equal to white folks. "The result is inevitable. Violence, murder, tragedy." Samuel's defender offered weak rebuttals about circumstantial evidence. Then Samuel asked to speak. The judge hesitated but allowed it. "I did not kill Mrs. Grimball," Samuel said clearly. "I found her body that morning just before dawn. I was planning to run, that's true. But I didn't kill her. I ran because I'm a slave accused of murdering a white woman. Guilt or innocence doesn't matter when you look like me. Running was my only chance to live." The courtroom erupted. But Cordelia stood, her voice cutting through the chaos. "He's telling the truth. I know who killed Eleanor Grimball." After a hurried consultation, Cordelia was sworn in. Mrs. Grimball came to my house several times, increasingly agitated about my refusal to sell Samuel. Cordelia began. "On the night before she died, she sent me a note." She pulled it from her reticule. She said she'd found a buyer who would pay $4,000. She said if I refused, she'd be forced to take other measures. "What measures?" the prosecutor asked. "I don't know, but I believe she came that night to confront me. I was asleep. I believe she encountered someone else, Betsy Johnson, my former cook, whom I'd dismissed 2 weeks earlier for threatening Samuel with illegal sale. The courtroom erupted again. Betsy had keys to my house and intimate knowledge of my schedule. Cordelia pressed on. She'd been with me 15 years. She was deeply resentful of being dismissed over what she saw as a slave boy's lies. I'm suggesting Betsy and Mrs. Grimble were coordinating efforts to force Samuel's sale. If Betsy saw Mrs. Grimball in my garden that night, they may have argued about money, about who would profit. The fabric threads in Mrs. Grimball's hand, have they been compared to Betsy's clothing? The bruises, were they measured against Betsy's hands rather than Samuel's? Has anyone even questioned Betsy? The constable shifted uncomfortably. We didn't see cause to question the cook. The boy ran, so we assumed... You assumed guilt based on race rather than evidence, Cordelia said flatly. Betsy lives on Queen Street. It would be simple to question her. The trial was suspended. 2 days later, under questioning, Betsy's story collapsed. Yes, she'd been in contact with Mrs. Grimball. Yes, they'd discussed Samuel's sale. Yes, she'd gone to Trad Street that night. They'd argued about money. The argument escalated. Mrs. Grimble threatened to cut Betsy out entirely. In rage, Betsy grabbed Eleanor's throat. Eleanor fell, hit her head on the brick. Betsy panicked and fled. I didn't mean to kill her, Betsy sobbed. I just wanted what I was owed. Samuel was released December 22nd. Cordelia met him outside the jail. I'm sorry, she said. I nearly got you killed. You saved my life. You figured out the truth when everyone else was happy to see me hang. The letters to Baltimore, Cordelia said. They're still on my desk, if you want them. Yes, Samuel said finally. I think I do. Not because I'm running, because I'm choosing it. They stood together one last time, two people who'd nearly destroyed each other, but somehow survived. Goodbye, Mrs. Ravenel, Samuel said. Goodbye, Samuel. He walked away toward whatever life waited beyond Charleston. Cordelia returned to the house on Trad Street, where the silence waited as it always had. She climbed to the music room and sat at the piano. For a long time, she stared at the keys, remembering everything that had happened here. Then she began to play that simple folk melody one last time. Her fingers moved over the keys, creating the tune her mother had taught her when music was just music, uncomplicated by ambition or need. She played it through once, then again, then let her hands fall silent. Samuel's first letter arrived in March of 1849. He was in Baltimore working with a choir director. The pay was modest, but honest. He was singing hymns and spirituals, finding something in that music he'd never found in Italian areas. More letters came over years, teaching music in 1851, Philadelphia by 1853, married to a woman named Grace by 1856. Cordelia wrote back occasionally, careful letters maintaining respectful distance. She told him about Charleston, about Betsy's conviction for manslaughter and death in prison 3 years later, about the quiet house on Trad Street. In 1860, with war looming, Samuel's letters stopped. 3 months after her final letter, a response came from Grace. Samuel passed in September, Grace wrote. It was consumption. He went peacefully. In his final days, he spoke of you often. He wanted you to know that despite everything, he was grateful. You gave him back his voice when he'd resigned himself to silence. That gift, complicated as it was, shaped the rest of his life. He said you were human, as was he, and that was enough understanding for any relationship. Grace described the funeral, the music Samuel chose, the people who came. He never forgot that first night in the garden, singing under the magnolia tree. He said that was the moment he remembered who he was. Thank you for giving him that moment, even if what followed was difficult. It mattered. Cordelia read the letter 3 times, then placed it in her desk drawer alongside the original bill of sale listing Samuel's purchase price as 9 cents. She was 60 years old now, alone in a city preparing for war. She climbed to the music room one last time and played through all the pieces they'd learned together, Mozart and Rossini and Handel and that folk melody. When she finished, she closed the piano lid and left the room, closing the door behind her. She never went back. The house survived the war, survived Reconstruction, survived Cordelia herself, who died in 1872. In her will, she left instructions for the music room to be sealed, its contents preserved. Decades later, historians researching antebellum Charleston discovered the sealed room and documents inside. Letters, the bill of sale, Cordelia's diaries detailing the lessons. They pieced together the story of Samuel, the boy purchased for 9 cents who had a voice that rivaled opera singers, who'd been displayed in Charleston parlors before disappearing into history. Some called it exploitation, others called it more complicated. 2 people trapped by circumstances neither fully controlled, finding connection in music before being torn apart by the society that brought them together. The truth contained elements of both and many more besides. Beauty and cruelty, gift and theft, freedom found and lost and found again in unexpected ways. A story Charleston tried to forget, but couldn't quite erase, preserved in sealed rooms and old letters and the memory of a voice that once sang in a moonlit garden, pure and perfect and heartbreakingly brief. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed? Was Cordelia a villain who exploited Samuel, or a flawed woman trying to find meaning in loss? Was Samuel's gift worth the cost of being discovered? Leave your comment below. If you enjoyed this tale and want more forgotten histories like this, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries buried in America's past. These voices from history deserve to be heard. See you in the next video.